Hello everybody, and welcome to WTF Hammer Underworlds. It's going to be another Season 1 Warband review. This time we're going to be looking at the Ironskull's Boyz. These guys are a bunch of Iron Jaws who, for whatever reason, got trapped in Shadespire, the Mirrored City, which caused them to have repeated cycles of fighting and then dying and repeating, and they're going to like it because that's their style. In this Warband review, I'm going to be looking at their fighter cards, their faction-specific cards, specifically their objective and power cards. Then I'm going to be rating this Warband on a scale of S to D. I'm going to be starting with the fighter cards. So Ironskull's Boyz is a 4-unit Warband, consisting of guys who have some of the highest wounds in Warhammer Underworlds, 5 for their leader, 4 across the board for everybody else. And let's just take a closer look at these specific units. We have Gurzag Ironskull, who's the leader, who has a melee attack that hits on 2 hammers and does 3 damage, which is very solid, has 3 movement, 1 shield, defense, and 5 wounds, and upon becoming inspired, the only thing that really changes is that he gets a reroll on his attack action, which is nice, because 2 hammers isn't the most reliable. He also has a nice Inspire mechanic, which all of these guys do, which is that they Inspire whenever they're damaged, which is likely just to kind of organically happen as the game progresses. Bone Kata, very similar, 2 hammers and 3 damage, making him comparable to Ironskull. Only real shortcoming is the fact that he has 4 wounds instead of 5 wounds. Next we have Basha and then Haka, who are very similar, being fairly weak when uninspired with a 2-sword attack, doing 1 damage, but on a crit having knockback. And then upon inspiring, actually gaining the biggest boost of this warband, going to 3 swords and 2 damage. And Haka being similar, going from 2 swords to 3 swords and 1 damage to 2 damage, but instead his attack becomes a cleave attack on a successful crit. And that's this warband. Let's take a look at the pros and cons. Pros being that they have an easy Inspire mechanic, they have very high wounds, they have decent accuracy, high damage, generally speaking, and a medium model number. They have 4 units, which is enough models to have no wasted activations in general. Cons being that they have low movement, only 3 movement across the board, low defense, only having 1 shield defense across the board, no ranged options, no reliable special combat abilities. I mean, they have cleave and knockback on a crit with their 2 weakest units, but that's it. And they have no other special abilities, like how the Sepulchral Warden can have 2 units move with an action. They don't have any special abilities like that. So that summarizes the fighter cards. Now we're going to be looking at the objective cards. Starting with the Surge, Call of the Wa. Score this immediately if 3 or more of your fighters made a charge action in this phase, worth 1 glory point. I'm giving this a B because it's actually a decent card. It's not contingent on any dice roll, so as long as you can get 3 units to successfully make charge actions, whether or not the shot lands, you're going to score this card. The problem is that they don't have great movement, which makes it kind of unreliable to score unless you're facing another aggro warband, or a warband that has many units. There's Dead Cunnin. Score this immediately if a friendly fighter has 2 or more supporting fighters than their target when making an attack action, worth 1 glory. I'm giving this a B as well because if you decide to play a support playstyle, it can be pretty advantageous in the sense that it will overcome their medium ability to hit accurately, but it would require an investment in some power cards to pull this off, or just dedicating a playstyle more toward concentrated attacking. Too Dumb to Die. Score this immediately if a friendly fighter suffers 3 or more damage in a single attack and is not taken out of action, for 1 glory. I'm giving this a C because it could be pretty good if you're fighting a warband that hits hard, but it's an objective card that's sort of out of your control. You just kind of have to hope that one of your units has enough wounds to take a 3 damage hit and then survives it. So those are the Surge cards. Let's look at the score in the end phase cards. We're going to start with biggest and the best. Score this in an end phase if your leader took an enemy fighter out of action in the preceding action phase. So that's Gurzag Ironskull. You get 1 glory point if you successfully do that. I'm giving this a B because it's very likely to happen, so long as Gurzag isn't taken out of action fairly early on, which is possible, even though he's tough. But it's only worth 1 glory in the end phase, so it's not the greatest card. There's More of Us. Score this in an end phase if you have more fighters on the battlefield than your opponent, worth 1 glory. I'm giving this a C because the majority of warbands have an equal or greater number of units. But it's one of those things where it could be very easy to pull off if you're facing a 3-unit warband, but there aren't that many of those. So if you're able to pull off a bunch of kills and then score this, that's nice, but it's only worth 1 in the end phase, so meh. Get to Boss. Score this in an end phase if your warband took an enemy leader out of action in the preceding action phase, worth 1 glory. I'm giving this a C because leaders are obviously the hardest units to take out of action, and these guys don't have great movement, nor do they have any specific power cards that help them focus on an enemy leader. So I don't see this as being a very powerful objective card. Good scrap. Score this in an end phase if 3 or more fighters were taken out of action in the preceding action phase, worth 2 glory points. I'm giving this a B because it's pretty possible, and it also works out if one of your units happens to die. So if it's your play style to just approach, aggressively attack, charge, kill, it's not unrealistic that 3 units will be taken out of action before the end of the round. Punch up. Score this in an end phase if each of your surviving fighters, at least 2, made an attack action against different enemy fighters in the preceding action phase, worth 2 glory. I'm giving this a B because it's very good in the late game. If it's the second or third round and you just happen to have 2 units left, then it's super easy to pull off. Early in the game, it's very difficult to pull off. With the low movement, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to have 4 guys charging different enemies. So I can even be negotiated to a C on this one. It really depends on when you draw it. Finally, we have showing off. Score this in an end phase if your leader took 2 or more enemy fighters out of action in the preceding action phase, worth 1 glory. I'm giving this a C. I mean, maybe even a D. Pretty unlikely that Gurzag going to kill 2 enemy units in 1 round. I mean, it is possible, but I mean, I probably should have just made this a D. It's only worth 1 glory point even, so it's not a good card. And finally, we got the only score in the third end phase card. Art is Iron. Score this in the third end phase if none of your fighters are out of action, worth 3 glory. I'm giving this a D just because I don't think I've ever played a game of Warhammer Underworlds with any warband where when the whole game was done, I had all my units. So even though these guys are tough in theory with their 4 and 5 wounds, their defense is not good. There's lots of cards that do damage despite your defensive characteristic, like ploys and spells and stuff. So this just doesn't seem like a realistic thing to pull off. So those are the objective cards, and they typically promote attacking enemy fighters, taking enemy fighters out of action, surviving, and supporting. So that kind of summarizes what Games Workshop seems to have strategized for these guys in terms of their objectives. So those are the objective cards. Let's look at the power cards. We got ploys, and we have upgrades. Starting with the ploys, we have Having a Good Time. Choose a fighter and roll an attack dice. If you roll a hammer or a crit, they can make an attack action. So you basically have a 50% chance that one of your units makes an attack action, which unless they have some kind of a special upgrade would just be a melee attack action. Now, I'm giving this a B because it could pay off, but there's just lots of random factors. I mean, you have to be adjacent to an enemy unit, which is pretty likely that at some point in the game during a power phase, you're gonna be one of your units is gonna be adjacent to an enemy. But then you have a 50% roll to even have a chance to swing, and they don't swing with the highest accuracy. So there's a pretty low percentage that this thing will actually provide anything beneficial. Brutal but cunning. Reaction. Play this after a friendly fighter's attack action. You could push that fighter up to 3 hexes. This is a very good card. You take a swing, you push, that opens up an opportunity to take another swing or just to get one of your units out of harm's way. Deafening Bellow. Choose an enemy fighter adjacent to one of your fighters. Push that fighter 1 hex. So it's basically a poor man's distraction. I'm giving it a C because these guys don't have good movement, and having to get next to a unit just to push them during the power phase is not all that valuable. Gorkamorka's Blessing. The first attack action with a range of 1 or 2 in the next activation has +1 damage. Just a +1 damage card. I'm giving it a B. This is an aggro warband that definitely benefits their playstyle, and it's just generally good. Impress the Boss. +1 damage for the first attack action in the next activation made by a friendly fighter adjacent to your leader. So this is only worth a C because, I mean, it's a conditional +1 damage. That only applies if you have a unit next to your leader. So this would obviously benefit a clustering type of playstyle where you're trying to get your units to support each other. But even then, it's conditional. I would just go with the other +1 damage card. Cunning but Brutal. As a reaction, play this after a friendly fighter's move action. That fighter can make an attack action. You cannot play this during a charge action. So a very nice card. I'm giving it an A. It allows you to move, make a free attack, possibly combine that with Brutal but Cunning, move your guy 3, make another attack. So this opens up a lot of opportunities for attacks and pushing and all those sorts of things. Last Lunge. Reaction. Play this during an attack action or ploy that will take a friendly fighter out of action. Before removing them from the battlefield, roll an attack die, 50% chance to make an attack action with them, and it has to target the attacker. So I'm giving this a B, but I probably should have given it a C because it's just less good than Having a Good Time. It's conditional on one of your units being taken out of action by a fighter who's adjacent to them, and then they have a 50% chance to make an attack, at which point they have to make an attack and it has no choice but to target the guy who attacked them. Leading by example. Reaction. Play this after an attack action made by your leader that takes an enemy fighter out of action. Another friendly fighter that has not already made a move or charge action can make a charge action. So I'm giving this a B. It's okay. I mean, if your leader takes an enemy fighter out of action, which is pretty likely, one of your units who hasn't really done anything can then move or charge. More chopping. Roll an extra attack dice for the first attack action and the next activation. Generally useful. Extra attack die, that's worth a B. And pillage. Remove one objective token that you hold from the battlefield. I'm giving this a B because it's a very nice card. There aren't many warbands that are able to destroy objective tokens, but these guys don't have any objective cards to capitalize from it. So because of that, I can only give it a B. We have Scragum. Each friendly fighter that supports the first attack action in the next activation is considered to be 2 supporting fighters. So I'm giving this a B, maybe even an A, because it aligns with their objective card that scores immediately when they have 2 or more supporting fighters than the enemy. But because it synchronizes with that, it's pretty good. It also increases their odds to hit, so it's actually a pretty solid card. And those are the ploys, and this is just a quick summary of what they do in general. They allow opportunities for out-of-turn actions, they increase damage, they push friendly and enemy fighters, they increase the accuracy of attacks, they destroy objectives, they alter enemy position, and they improve support. So those were the ploys. Now we're going to have a look at the upgrades. Starting with Ard Ed, restricted to Haka and Basha, gives them a -1 damage when they're hit to a minimum of 1 damage. I'm giving this a B. It'd be worth more if it applied to all units, but it only applies to Haka and Basha, which aren't really throwaway units, but definitely aren't your top tier units, so because of that, it's not as great as it could be. Aspiring Boss, restricted to Haka. As a reaction during an attack action by this fighter that targets an enemy leader and fails, you can re-roll 1 attack dice. So it helps Haka specifically have a better chance of killing the enemy leader. I'm giving this a D because he is one of your worst units, so he doesn't seem like the most appropriate unit to actually send to have a one-on-one against the leader. So because of that, I would not recommend putting this card in your deck. Brutal Frenzy, restricted to Haka or Basha. Roll an extra attack dice when this fighter makes a charge action. I'm similarly giving this a B because it's a good card. It's a +1 die on charge. These guys will usually be charging. That helps them hit with pretty high accuracy. But because it's restricted to Haka and Basha, it's not really worth a higher ranking than this. Brutal Swing, restricted to Bone Kutta. It's a range 1, 3 sword attack that does 2 damage with scything. I'm giving this a B because this is actually a useful upgrade. It makes his to hit a little bit more reliable, his damage a little bit lower, but then he hits all adjacent targets. We have Crush and Cleave. Gurzag and Bone Kutta can get Cleave with this card. This is worth a B because Cleave is nice. It ignores shields, increases accuracy, can score what armor if you decide to put that in your deck, so it's just pretty solid. Dead Ard. This fighter can only be driven back by a critical hit, restricted to Gurzag and Bone Kutta. I'm giving this a C because there are other universal cards that just make it so that you can't be driven back at all, and crits do happen, and then this card would get ignored, and that would just be annoying. So it's not so great. It's not terrible, but it's not so great. Headbutt, restricted to Gurzag, a melee 2 hammer 2 damage attack that if it succeeds, makes it so that the target cannot be activated for the rest of the phase. I'm giving this an A, maybe even debatably an S, because it makes it so that Gurzag can just castrate any fighter. And if you're playing against a warband that relies on one fighter, like the Sepulchral Guard, or Molog, or Hrothgorn, it could really give them a big handicap if you're pulling this attack off consistently. Headlong Rush, restricted to Basha. Basha gains knockback 1 in a phase in which they made a charge action. So it's a knockback under the condition that Basha charges. So I'm giving it a D because, I mean, he can get a knockback anyway if he rolls a crit. And I mean, knockback isn't so valuable that it's worth a card that still has so many restrictions associated with it. Gurzag, unkillable. During an attack action or ploy that takes this fighter out of action, roll a defense dice. If you roll a shield or a crit, so 50% chance, they take no damage, they're not taken out of action, and you discard this card. So it's a faction-specific soul trap that's unique to Gurzag. Pretty good. I'm giving it an A because it makes him harder to kill. And finally, we have Waw. This fighter's attack action with range of 1 or 2 have +1 damage in a phase in which they made a charge. I'm giving this a B. It's not as good as Great Strength because it's contingent on the charge, but pretty good odds. Most of your attacks are going to be performed through charges, and +1 damage is nothing to scoff at, so it's not bad. All right, so we got through those guys. Let's take a look at what upgrades tend to promote in general. They promote improved attack accuracy, improved durability, cleaving, preventing drive back, increasing damage, impairing enemy activations, and also provides some unexceptional upgrades, minus the scything one for Bone Cutter. Alright guys, let's take an overall look at all these different cards and how they rank. Objective cards, we can see that the majority of their objective cards ranked a B, which is in the middle, so mediocre, not terrible, not great. The problem is without having S or A cards, it makes it common that you're just going to end up resorting to universal cards that are better. So because these guys don't have the greatest objective cards, there's pretty good odds that very few are actually going to be included in any Ironskull Boyz deck. Gambits are a little bit more solid. I didn't rank anything as S, but we have a couple A's and a lot of B's, which line somewhere in the middle. Upgrades, pretty similar to the Gambits in that respect. So we've gone through all their cards, everybody. We've gone through the fighter cards, the faction-specific cards, and now it's time to rate this warband on a scale of S to D. So now I'm going to give you an overview of what these guys bring to the table. They can gain glory through support, and this helps counterbalance their unexceptional attack accuracy, which is nice. And I've actually played against Ironskull's Boyz decks that thrive on having their units support each other, and it's a pretty strong tactic. They have a lot of wounds, and they have a likely to occur inspire mechanic. In fact, it's probably guaranteed to occur unless someone lands a 4 or 5 damage shot on you. However, their objective cards that promote toughness are not exceptional, not even worth putting in your deck. And there are none that actually support inspiring, which is unfortunate because these guys inspire easy. It would be nice if they had a card that rewarded that. Furthermore, most objectives promote engaging the enemy and killing, but they have low movement. They have a couple unreliable out-of-turn attack power cards, so it makes taking enemies out of action a little bit difficult. And finally, they have cards that support an aggressive playstyle. Unfortunately, they lack versatility and have no inherent ability to score passive glory, except in the third end phase, which just puts them at an automatic disadvantage to other warbands who are able to score passive glory before Ironskull's Boyz can actually cross that boundary between them. So with all this in mind, I'm going to give these guys an overall ranking of C. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you have any thoughts or suggestions, please comment below. Please like and subscribe to encourage me to make more videos, if you like them, of course. And I've also included a link in the description to a balancing video where we're going to look at what we can do to tweak Ironskull's Boyz to make them more competitive. So hope you guys enjoyed this video and have a nice day.